Sorry, boy. But his captain's got to teach his men what happens to those what crossing.
Captain's got to teach stuff.
Good morning from the Bat Cavern. It is Friday, 3/25/2022. It's Friday. I ain't got no job, and I ain't got stuff to do. So I wanted to continue on this three-part series about Judaism. We're going to get into the Golem, the Mark of the Beast, the Image of the Beast, and all that stuff. In the next part, that's going to be more speculative, but this is going to be the second part, showing how the world not only does Jerusalem not only does Jerusalem conquer politically, but then Judaism comes back as a main thing. So for starters, we want to remember going back to Ezekiel 39. Remember, Ezekiel and Daniel were contemporary with each other, so it should not be rocket science for people to figure out that the 7-year period at the end of Ezekiel's 39th war is Daniel's 70th week, okay? Because he's going to go from there, and then he mentions the 7-year period, and then the very next prophecies are talking about the millennium. So it should be really, really obvious in light of reading Daniel that it's like he talks about Israel being regathered in the land, talks about this great northern army coming against them, then he talks about a 7-year period, just briefly, where they're burning the weapons of war, and then he talks about the millennium. Why doesn't he talk about the 7-year period? Because he's contemporary with Daniel. Okay, God doesn't need two people prophesying the exact same thing at the exact same time. There's a reason God does things by 2 or 3 witnesses. Yes, we have 2 witnesses for the 7-year period. We have, they shall burn the weapons with fire, and they shall spoil those that spoiled them. Says they should burn them with fire for 7 years, and of course spoil them that spoils them. I showed you guys how that connects to Isaiah 14 and this Damascus being destroyed. Okay, so this is going to be Israel winning this war, and Israel probably in concert with the nation that the Antichrist comes from, as well as Saudi Arabia, are going to take over the Middle East. So it's going to be those 3. So knowing this, we want to look at that and then go, okay, well, what's going to happen after that? Well, we know what happens after that because we go right to Daniel, who's the contemporary with him. And we're going to get into Ezekiel 43 then and show hindsight in the millennium because they're going to talk about it more. So if you go to Daniel chapter 9, we see this is the 70 weeks prophecy, and says, therefore know that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and rebuild Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again with a wall even in troublous times. Okay, what does that mean? That means that and I've never done this full calculation. If somebody can find somebody who's done the calculation, that'd be great. But it basically means the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem, that was made in the time of Nehemiah. The temple being rebuilt was made in the time of Ezra. I'm sorry, but the wall was rebuilt in the time of Nehemiah. So the commandment to restore and build Messiah shall be 7 weeks. Okay, so they've got 49 years, and then 62 weeks. The street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublous times. Okay, and this is the book of Nehemiah when they're doing this. People are trying to harass them and even attack them while they're building the wall. And they're doing that for I guess it's about 49 years afterwards by the time it gets done. And then after that, you count 62 weeks, and that's going to take you to the time where Christ does his triumphal entry. Then it says, after the 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off. That's the death of Christ, but not for himself. That's for our sins. And the people of the prince shall come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. That would be the, this is going to have a double entente to it. So this is going to happen in 70 AD, but it's also going to happen in the last days. And the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are returned. Okay, so there was no flood, obviously, in 70 AD. But we read about Satan spewing water like a flood out of his mouth. How that ends up being physically, we don't know. And then, of course, the abomination of desolation. And that desolation, the image of the beast, is the desolation till the end of the war, is what goes on till the end of Armageddon, basically. Until Christ basically takes the beast and the false prophet and removes that and cleanses the temple. And then it says, and he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Okay, and some people will say, what does confirm mean? Well, it can mean establish or strengthen. This is simple. He just reestablishes the old covenant and the Jews' ability to sacrifice in the Temple Mount. That's how he confirms the covenant. Okay, and then it says, how do we know this? We don't have to speculate too much, because it says, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Okay, so what does that mean? This is really simple. The covenant that he establishes obviously has to allow the Jews to sacrifice in the Temple Mount, because they're not doing it now. And then he causes it to cease. So there's your covenant. There's no 7-year peace treaty. Everyone's always talking about this 7-year peace treaty. That might be a part of it, but there's nothing in the text that suggests that. It just says he confirms a covenant with many. And of course, Jesus talks about, in Zechariah, I think it's chapter 11 or 12, he talks about breaking his covenant with all the people. Okay, the covenant was with Israel. God broke the covenant, and the Antichrist is going to reestablish it. So Christ actually puts an end to the covenant, okay, at his death. Remember, the covenant itself was crucified. Christ is the law, okay? Christ is the fulfillment of the law. He was nailed to a cross, okay? So they measured out his 30 pieces of silver. This is all in Zechariah. And basically by that, they bought their way out of the covenant, okay? And so Christ says, okay, by that 30 pieces of silver, those were my wages for being your God. Okay, essentially what Christ does is he says, remember, the old covenant was a two-party covenant. God says, I'll do this for you if you do this for me, okay? Well, God did his end, but Israel didn't do their end. So finally in Zechariah, let's actually look at that. You guys need to know this, because all your people who are getting back into Judaism and saying the law is still in effect, you need to take them to this prophecy in Zechariah, because he flat out tells them the law is done. Jeremiah already tells them the law is done. Hebrews tells them the law is done, okay? But in Zechariah, he specifically mentions breaking his covenant. And I think it's Zechariah chapter 11, right here. So he says, this is all talking about Jesus. So he says, for I will no more pity the inhabitants of this land, saith the Lord. But lo, I will deliver the men, everyone to his neighbor's hand, and into the hand of the king, and they shall smite the land out of their hand, and will not deliver them. So he says, I will deliver every one into his neighbor's hand, and into the hand of his king, and they shall smite the land, and out of their hand I will not deliver them. So he's talking about the final dispersion of Israel in 70 AD. Okay? He says, I will feed the flock of slaughter, even you, O poor the flock, and I took unto me 2 staffs, the one I called beauty, and the other I called bands. And I fed the flock. Okay. 3 shepherds also I cut off in 1 month, and my soul loathed them, and my soul abhorred thee. So remember how Jesus said they were like sheep without a shepherd. Well, who are the 3 shepherds? And the shepherds are the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and Herod. Okay. The Pharisees are basically the teaching wing. The Sadducees are the priestly wing and the sacrifices, and Herod is the kingly wing, okay? So these 3 are kind of taking the place of prophet, priest, and king that God established in the Old Testament. Herod is a false king. He's half a Levite, half an Idumean. The Sadducees are the legit line, but they're basically political compatriots with Rome. And the Pharisees are basically false apostles. They're claiming the authority to establish and bind and loose the law, which they received from the Hasmonean Dynasty, which is the Maccabean Levitical false royal line that shouldn't have been there. Okay, so those are the 3 shepherds that he cuts off. Remember, when 70 AD, when he destroys them, he cuts off those 3 shepherds. Okay, but Jesus warned you against the leaven of Sadducees and the Pharisees and of Herod. Okay, and those are the 3 shepherds that he cuts off. Then he says, I will not feed you that dieth, let it die, and that is to be cut off, let it be cut off, and the rest, and let the rest, everyone eat the flesh of another. So this is the siege of Jerusalem, where they're actually eating each other's flesh. He says that dieth, let it die, that is to be cut off, let it be cut off. Remember, he's talking about cutting off the branches that don't bear any fruit. Okay. Then he says, and I took my staff, even beauty, and I cut it asunder, that I might break my covenant that I made with all the people. Now, your average Bible teacher is going to freak out at this, because they're like, oh, God doesn't break his covenant. And there's people who will say, that's the covenant he made with the Gentiles. And it's like, what covenant did God make with the Gentiles? The one that he wouldn't flood the earth again in Noah? Because that's the only covenant that was made with all the nations. No, God is not taking it over and flooding the earth again. He's not, that was a unilateral covenant. That was not a covenant that was based on works. The only covenant that God can possibly take back is a covenant that is based on works. Because if we don't keep up our end of the bargain, he can renege out of that. If it's a covenant just based on a promise, then he can't renege out of that. God can't break a covenant promise, but the old covenant was not based on a promise. Again, read the book of Galatians, you guys. Basic Old Testament, New Testament. Get this stuff down, okay? So it says, and it was broken in that day, and so the poor of the flock that waited upon me knew that it was the word of the Lord. What does that mean? It's because the poor of the flock were the ones that Jesus came, the one that they were like sheep without a shepherd, the sinners who we called to repentance, knew in 70 AD that it was the word of the Lord, because Jesus prophesies over and over again the destruction of the temple of Jerusalem. So when the old covenant is done away with, okay, remember in Hebrews, which is 5 years before the destruction, he says the old covenant is now obsolete and ready to fade away. So what does it mean? It was made obsolete when Christ was crucified and the new covenant came, okay? It fades away when Jerusalem is destroyed and they can't even carry out the sacrifices anymore, okay? So then he says, and I said to them, if you think it good, give me my price. So this is what he's saying to the Jews. I want to cancel this covenant. I want out. God is saying, I want out. I don't want to maintain my end of the covenant anymore if you guys are going to maintain yours. But God's saying, I was your God faithfully for all these years, okay? So you owe me something, right? And so he says, if you think it's good to pay me my wages and buy me out of this covenant, give me my price. If not, forbear. So they weighed for my price 30 pieces of silver. When they paid Judas that 30 pieces of silver to betray Christ, what they were doing is they were paying God. Think about it. Satan is in Lucifer, okay? Satan, whether you like it or not, Satan is an agent of God, okay? So literally, he gets the money. He says they're buying under the covenant. And Satan thinks he's destroying Israel. He's accomplishing his goals, but he's not, because Satan doesn't understand the new covenant, okay? And the Lord said to me, cast it to the potter, the goodly price at which I was prized for them. And they took the 30 pieces of silver and cast them to the potter in the house of the Lord. What does that mean? That's fulfilled when Judas takes the money. And basically, this is what God's saying. You're giving me my money, and God's saying, I'm going to throw it to the potter. So what Satan does, and Satan doesn't understand why he's doing this. What I think is really going on, I think Satan's trying to undo what he's doing because he's realizing that's going to be his destruction. Because Satan, remember, Satan had the power of death and hell, okay? It says he had the power of death and hell in Hebrews. He loses that power when he unjustly allows Christ to die, because Christ knew no sin. And when he realized Christ is going to die, see, he knows he's going to get arrested, but when he realizes he's going to die, I think Satan's scared. And I think Satan in Judas is what compels him to do it. It says Judas regretted it. Maybe it is Judas, because Jesus is saying about Judas, it'd be better for him if he'd never been born. And again, this is all speculation. Don't take this to the gospel. But the point is he throws it down, and then they use it to buy the potter's field to bury the dead. So that is fulfilled in Judas. So that's when they buy their way out of it. The destruction of Jerusalem is when it happens, and it says, I cut asunder mine other staff, even bands, that I might break the brotherhood between Judah and Israel. What does that mean, the brotherhood between Judah and Israel? Because most people think this is northern Israel and southern Judah, but you got to remember, northern Israel at this time is already in captivity. They're gone. They're no more. Okay? Judah and Israel in the new covenant sense are going to be the Jews and the Christians. Because remember, you become Israel by a true Jew by being part of Christ. Okay? So it's the Jews and the Christians. So he breaks the brotherhood between the Jews and the Christians. Why? Because true Israel accepts Christ, okay? Because Christ is Israel. Christ is the King of Israel. He is Israel. So then the Lord says to me, take unto thee yet the instruments of a foolish shepherd. Now he's talking about the Antichrist. And he says, for lo, I will raise up a shepherd in the land which shall not visit those that be cut off, neither shall seek the young one, nor heal that is broken, nor feed that standeth still, but shall eat the flesh of the fat and tear their claws to pieces. Okay? So this is now the false Christ who's going to come in the place of the true Christ that they rejected. He says, woe to the idol, idol, because he's going to be the image of the beast, the idol shepherd that leaveth the flock. How does he leave the flock? He dies. he gets cut off. See, Christ, when they kill him, he comes back to life. He doesn't die. When the Antichrist gets killed, he doesn't come back to life. So he leaves the flock, and it says, the sword shall be upon his arm and upon his right eye. His arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. Now, this is a mystery, and you need to understand how complex this mystery is, because it's going to blow your mind when you get it. Most people think the reason that a sword is coming out of Jesus' mouth in the book of Revelation is because he's the word of the Lord, and the word of God is a double-edged sword. False. That's not the reason why. Remember, when the Bible is saying the word of the Lord is a double-edged sword and dividing bone and marrow and blah, 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 he's talking about Logos. He's talking about Jesus himself is the sword, okay? He's the word of the Lord. He's the sword of the Lord, okay? So when they say the sword of the Lord is my strength, right? That's Jesus, okay? So think about this. It says about the Antichrist in Daniel that he will be killed, but not by the hand of man. But here it says a sword will be upon his right arm, okay? And upon his right eye. So how is he killed with a sword, but not by the hand of man? And the answer is that sword proceeds from the mouth of Jesus. So what happens? Well, it also says in Thessalonians that he's destroyed by the brightness of the Lord's appearing at his coming. Okay? Well, at his coming, he appears as lightning. Okay, so what happens? It also says, Jesus says he saw Satan fall as lightning. He says that prophetically. So what happens? And the answer is this. Jesus shows up in the clouds and he says to the two witnesses, come up here. Okay? He speaks a word, but he appears in a flash of lightning. Okay? As he speaks, lightning shoots forth and destroys the Antichrist. That's the sword that's upon his arm and upon his right eye. He's destroyed by the brightness of the Lord's coming. So think about it like this. He's sitting here in the temple, and he just claimed to be God. He kills the two witnesses, and then they're having a 3.5 day celebration of the two witnesses. Well, in that 3.5 day celebration of the two witnesses, the Antichrist that's when he's going to sit in the temple and claim to be God. When he does, Christ is going to appear, and he is going to appear like a bright flash of lightning. So what's the Antichrist going to do when Christ appears? He's going to go like this, and a bolt of lightning is going to shoot him down. And so that's why his right eye and right hand are going to be withered, because he's literally covering his face from the flash of this lightning, and then this lightning bolt shoots him down. That's how he dies, okay? After that, they're going to hook him up to the image of the beast somehow and claim that he's still alive. But what does this say? It says he leaves the flock. Okay, the sword shall be upon his right eye, and his right hand, his arm shall be clean dried up, and his right eye shall be utterly darkened. So that's what the Antichrist is going to look like. And that's why you get the mark of the beast in your right hand or forehead, because it's just like we are crucified with Christ through the mark of the Holy Spirit, the seal of God. You're going to be, if you will, dead with the Antichrist, crucified with him, if you will, through the mark of the beast, which is going to represent his death. Okay? So, this is talking about Christ and Antichrist. So let's go back to Daniel now. He strengthens the covenant with them for 1 week. And it says, he shall confirm the covenant for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and oblation to cease. Why? Because that's when he stands in the temple and claims that he's God. Okay? Now you need to know what he is doing, because the answer to what he's doing, remember, Daniel and Ezekiel are contemporary. Ezekiel, in Ezekiel 43, explains what he's mimicking. Okay? And so he says, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate. That's the image of the beast being set up, even till the consummation, and that determined shall be poured on the desolate. Okay? The consummation is the outpouring of the bowls of wrath. It says if you go to Daniel chapter 7, he says, but the judgment shall sit, and they shall take away his dominion to consume and destroy it until the end. So the consummation is the outpouring of the wrath that takes away his kingdom once he's got it. Now he's ruling for 3.5 years, but the consummation is like they're going to consume his kingdom, and all the water is going to turn to blood. It's going to turn to darkness. It's starve him out. It's basically a siege of God on the kingdom of the Antichrist. Okay. So now we're going to go to Ezekiel 43, and Ezekiel 43, remember, it takes place. See how Ezekiel and Daniel are right next to each other in the Bible? The reason is because they're contemporary, okay? You had literally, your major prophets are Isaiah, and then a generation later you have, honestly, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and Daniel are all contemporary, Okay, remember, Daniel is reading Jeremiah's prophecy in Daniel, and Ezekiel mentions Daniel by name. Okay, and Jeremiah ends the book of Kings when Jerusalem gets sacked, and he mentions the first siege of the people where Daniel goes out. Okay, and then Ezekiel is he's in the group that goes out as well, but he's a priest. Okay, so they're all people who are taken out of Jerusalem in different ways and different reasons around the time it's destroyed. So you have Isaiah; these three are all contemporary. And then you're going to have the minor prophets listed afterwards, but they're grouped together in when they're written. So you want to understand that. Okay, now in Ezekiel 43, remember this is going to start in chapter 40, and he's describing the millennial temple in the 5 and 20th year of our captivity in the beginning of the year. See, that's when that prophecy starts. Okay. So 25 years into their captivity. Remember, this is the same captivity that Daniel goes out in. Okay, so they were taken out captive, and then Jerusalem's destroyed. So what happens is basically, if you read this in the end of the book of Kings and in the book of Jeremiah, you have basically three sons of Josiah that take place ruling after Josiah is killed by King Necho. King Necho is basically the king of Ethiopia and Egypt. He goes up to fight Nebuchadnezzar after the Assyrian Empire falls, because they're kind of competing now for control of the major trade routes in the Middle East. He goes up to fight him, and King Josiah, like an idiot, says, well, I'm going to go fight you just for passing through our land. And he's like, what are you doing? God sent me up here to fight Nebuchadnezzar. Why are you attacking me? And he tries to fight him anyways, and Josiah gets killed in that battle. So Josiah has three sons. The first son, King Necho, basically he loses the battle to Nebuchadnezzar, but on his way back, he goes and takes that first son down to Egypt, and he dies there. The second son, or I'm sorry, then they install his son in his place, I believe. No, I'm sorry, then he installs his brother in his place, so now the second son is there. Okay, and this is all patterned after Jesus, James, and Jude. Okay, because the same thing happens. Remember, Joseph and Josiah are a pattern. Jesus, James, and Jude are a pattern of Josiah's three sons, and then the destruction of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar in 70 AD are a pattern of each other. Okay, they're side by side. Okay, so you have Jesus is going down into Egypt and dying, because Egypt is the type of the grave in Israel. You have the second son that is taken captive to Nebuchadnezzar's court, and then he basically I'm sorry, what happens there? They take him to Nebuchadnezzar's court, and then his son is installed in his place, and Nebuchadnezzar comes back a few months later and says no, and puts the third brother in. Okay, and the third brother, so when the second brother rebels against him, that's when he takes Daniel and all those guys captive, and then he installs the third brother. The third brother then rebels against him, and that's when he destroys Jerusalem. So these are all guys that, if you read this stuff, and the same thing is with in Esther. In Esther, when you have Mordecai and those guys taken out of Jerusalem, it's the same time they're all taken out of Jerusalem, because Nebuchadnezzar basically goes into Jerusalem, takes out tons of the artisans, the craftsmen, and the administration, basically the smart people. And he takes them out and he installs them in his kingdom in different cities and stuff like that. And he just pulls them out of Jerusalem and he goes there. He basically takes the capacity of Jerusalem to rebel competently. So he takes the people who would help the king, rebel competently. So now if they rebel again, all you're going to have less is your less experienced, less competent people. Okay, so this is 25 years later. Ezekiel 40 is. Now we want to go back to, I believe it's Ezekiel 35. So you're going to see these, and when he's going to mark the date when he starts to speak, and then you're going to say, and the word of the Lord came to me, and the word of the Lord came to me. And that's all going to be that same date. Okay, so it says, it came to pass to me in the 12th year, in the 12th month of the first day of the month. And that the date of that month is usually, if you go back to the beginning of Ezekiel, this is in the 30th year of the 4th month of the 5th day of the month, as I was taken among the captives of the river Chebar, that the heavens were open. So he is dating all his prophecies from the time that he's taken captive. So it says it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month. So that's the 30th year. Then you get up to Ezekiel 34, or 33, So the Gog-Magog invasion is given in the 12th year, the 12th month. It's sometime after that that Jerusalem's destroyed. And that's how you know it's not this prophecy being fulfilled, because Jerusalem's destroyed. And then you get to chapter 40, and it says, and it's the 25th year of the beginning of the year, and the 10th day of the month, and the 14th year after the city was smitten. So he tells you that's how long it is after the city was smitten. So this is after the destruction of Jerusalem. Okay, so this is his final prophecy he gives, and of course it's after the Ezekiel 38-39 war. And God takes him up, and I'm not going to get into the first few chapters because they're literally describing this temple in great detail. Okay, but you get to chapter 43, and it says, afterward he brought me to the gate, even the gate that looked towards the east. So after the temple, he says, and behold, the glory of the Lord God of Israel came from the way of east, and his voice was like the voice of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory. Why is his voice like the voice of many waters? Revelation in here. And the answer is because when you hear a whole multitude speaking or singing in unison, it sounds like many waters, okay? The whole body of Christ is the whole church, and we're all in perfect unison and perfect harmony. We are Christ. We are all saying the same thing at the same time. And that's why you're going to keep hearing this voice like many waters in the book of Revelation, because it's the whole body of Christ speaking as one, okay? And it says, and it was according to the appearance of the vision that I saw, even according to the vision that I saw when I came to destroy the city, and the visions were like the vision I saw by the river Kibar, and I fell on my face. So he knows this is the same person that called him forth. When you have the chariot wheels and stuff like that, it's the Lord. And that's why he falls on his face. And this is the Lord who had him prophecy about the destruction of Jerusalem. And he says, and the glory of the Lord came into the house by the way of the gate, whose prospect is towards the east. So the Spirit took me up and brought me into the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house. So he's watching in his vision the Lord go into the temple, and then the Spirit brings him up and brings him inside the temple, okay? He's outside the temple, seeing it all described before this, and he's got a measuring reed. All this is reflected in the book of Revelation, okay? And he said, and I heard him speaking unto me out of the house, and the man stood by me. So this is the man who's giving the vision. And he said to me, Son of man, the place of my throne and the place of my soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever, and my holy name shall the house of Israel no more defile, neither they nor their kings by their whoredom, nor by the carcasses of their kings in high places. What the heck is this? This is interesting. This is Jesus talking to him. That's the man, okay? But Jesus is always calling him Son of Man. He's always calling Ezekiel Son of Man. This is the only book of the Bible where he's called the Son of Man, okay? Which is the title of Jesus. And he says, the place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever, and my holy name shall the house of Israel no more defile. So he's showing him what it's going to be like when he finally dwells there, okay? He goes into the temple from the east, and he sits there, and the gate is shut. Okay, we're going to keep going with this. The gate is shut, and he says, I will no more let them defile my stuff by their kings. Or I'm sorry, he says, I will no more let Israel defile neither they nor their kings by their whoredom. Remember the whore of Babylon. That's going to be their mark of the beast worship. That's going to be their unifying all the world's religions. And their carcasses of their kings in the high places. Why are there carcasses of their kings in the high places? Now, this didn't happen in the Old Testament. What this is the Antichrist is going to be dead. And then the image of the beast is going to be this artificial dead body that supposedly his soul is living in, and he's alive. So you have these two bodies, these two dead bodies, if you will, because neither one of them are alive. Those are carcasses. And then you have these two kings, because remember, the seventh is one of the eighth. So the Antichrist counts as two kings. The second is a robot. The first is the actual guy. Okay? Two carcasses, two kings. The carcasses of their kings are going to be in the Holy of Holies. Okay? So that's why their carcasses of their kings have defiled Israel and the house of Israel. And he says, how did they do it? He says, in there, this is how their carcasses of their kings have defiled it. In their setting of their threshold by my threshold. What is that talking about? Well, if you go into the Old Covenant, in the law, they talk about this law of binding yourself to somebody as a servant. Okay, now in that law, basically, if you were a debt servant to somebody and you went and worked for them, and then you basically decided you loved your master and you're better off under your master than you are doing your own thing, you would go and have your ear put on the doorpost of his threshold and pierce it. Okay, this was a foretype of the new covenant, because the new covenant is, the law is us doing our own thing in our own strength, and the new covenant is God doing it for us. Okay, we just listen to God and do what he says, and he does all the hard stuff for us. Okay, so that piercing by the doorpost is a type of the threshold, is a type of being crucified with Christ and bound to his house. Okay, and he's saying they set their threshold by my threshold. So they've set a counterfeit version of that next to his, which is going to be the mark of the beast. Okay, and their post by my post, so a counterfeit being crucified with Christ. Okay, and then he said, and the wall between me and them. What does that talk about? Well, remember how Jesus said with the Pharisees that they go to the ends of the earth to make a convert, and that convert is twice the son of hell as they are. And then he also says about them that they prevent people from entering the kingdom of heaven, for they neither enter in nor do they allow those who would enter. So this false, I mean, this is basically going to be works religion that's going to eventually amount to the mark of the beast. It creates a wall between God and the people, because they're blocking off the true way. And it says, they have defiled my holy name by their abominations that they have committed. Wherefore I have, remember the consummation, wherefore I have consumed them in mine anger. So the consummation is the wrath of God being poured out. Okay, remember, they consume the kingdom to the end. It's given to Christ and the saints. The consummation is complete at the end of Daniel's 70th weeks, when the bowls are finished being poured out. And their abomination is what is causing it. And remember, their abomination is a false threshold by his threshold. So it's a false way in, it's a false door, it's a false post, and it's a false abomination. Now remember, there is no crucified with Christ in the Old Testament. So this is all they have, is the foretype. Okay, and then they have the abomination of desolation, and therefore that causes the consummation or the wrath of God being poured out. So this word for anger, I almost guess that it's probably the same as wrath. Properly, the nose or the nostril, the face, occasionally the person, ire, anger, before countenance, face, forbearing, head, nose, nostril, worthy, wrath. Okay, it's literally like, that's what it is. Okay, that's what the wrath is in the countenance. Now let's go look at the wrath in the book of Revelation. Orge, properly desire, embracement of the mind, violent passion, punishment, anger, indignation, vengeance, wrath. Okay, there's two words. There's thuma and orge. I think one's in chapter 16. Thumos, passion, fierceness, indignation, wrath. Okay, so literally it's the wrath of God. The consummation of the Antichrist kingdom is poured out at the abomination of desolation. Now you don't know this, but you should know it, because Daniel's talking about it in their contemporary. So if you're a Jew living in the post-exilic period, okay, and remember, you're under Ezra. Ezra's teaching you. Ezra has these books. Ezra is gathering all the post-exilic books. What you have in the post-exilic writings is literally, these are your new books for your new prophets. So if you're a good Jew and you're excited about the new writings that are part of the canon, you have Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel. Okay, so those just got written. Okay, then you have Ezra and Nehemiah; those are getting written, and then you have Zechariah, Haggai, which are about the rebuilding of the temple, and that's why you have all the Christ and Antichrist stuff in there, and then Esther. Esther was actually written between the first half and the second half of Ezra, because remember, those guys were pulled out of the same captivity. Ezra grew up during that captivity, and it's during that time that they tried to get Ahasuerus, which is, there's two kings. Ahasuerus is the one in the middle, and the first one is the one who decrees the temples rebuilt, and the second one is the one that decrees the wall to be rebuilt, and it's the one in between that has to deal with Esther and trying to get the Jews killed. Okay, so that's the troublous times that the wall's being rebuilt in. Okay, so people want to wonder why Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther are in the Bible. And the answer is because they're describing the fulfillment of Daniel, which was just written the generation prior. Ezekiel, Daniel, and Jeremiah were just written the generation prior. Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther are the fulfillment of the wall and the moat being rebuilt in troublous times. Okay, and then the Jews finally get the better of their people. They plunder those people, and that plunder largely goes into the rebuilding of Jerusalem, and the Jews starting to come back to the Promised Land. Okay, it's all very important stuff. And then Zechariah and Haggai are all about the rebuilding of the temple. And after all that's done, the final book that's written is Malachi. And Malachi talks about Jesus coming. The sun will arise with healing in his wings. I'll send Elijah before the great and terrible day of the Lord. Remember the law of Moses. That's the end. That's the capstone of the books after the temple's rebuilt. It's the last book they got. Okay. And it has an epitaph for the two witnesses. It says, remember the law of Moses, and I will send you Elijah, my servant, before the great and terrible day of the Lord. That's the two witnesses right there. Okay. So in Ezekiel 43, what is he saying? He's saying, because the abomination of desolation. Now, who's he talking to? Is he talking to the Antichrist? Is he talking to the false prophet? And the answer is no. He says who? He says, the house of Israel shall no more defile, neither they nor their kings. Remember, Israel is raising up 7 shepherds, even 8 principal men. There's their kings, 10 kings. Okay, and remember, the Antichrist subdues 3 of them, so there's 7 left. Okay, so the Antichrist is the 7th, who's even the 8th, and those kings are raised up by Israel. Okay, now you guys who are anti, we stand with Israel. You can stand with Israel if you want. You can fall with Israel. We just got into that. Okay, everybody who burdens himself with Jerusalem is going to get crushed by it. You can fall with Israel. We don't stand with Israel. We stand with Israel's king. Okay, he's a king in exile. So Israel proper, the people who are running the government, that's Saul's government. That's the government that persecutes him. We don't stand with Saul. We stand with David. Right? We're outside of the camp. We're raiding the Philistines, right? We're among the Philistines and killing other Gentiles, right? What are we doing? We're the church. We're outside of Israel. Remember, you go read the book of Hebrews. He says, we follow him outside of the city where he was, we join Christ in his shame, and we go outside of the city, for we wait for a city to come. And Jude's saying, snatch him from the fire, because the city's going to burn. So we are the exiled army of David that follows him out. Okay? There's a counterfeit, though, to David doing that, because just like David did that, there's going to be a counterfeit Absalom, whose name means father of peace. And he gathers all the exiles, and he goes and tries to fight against David. And what does he do? He besieges Jerusalem. He takes the city. He rapes all David's concubines. He takes over the city, and he tries to hunt down the Jews in exile again. Okay, David and all his people are in exile again. What is that talking about? That's talking about the Jews that flee Jerusalem in the last days. Those are the people under David in the last days while Absalom is taken over. Absalom's the type of the Antichrist. Okay, so think about that. His name means father of peace. Ab is father. Shalom, Absalom means father of peace. Just like Solomon means peace man of peace. Solomon, man is Solomon. Also is Salmon, who marries Rahab the harlot, man of peace. Because Solomon is both a type of Christ and Antichrist. Salmon is a type of Christ. He marries Rahab, the Gentile harlot, makes her an honest woman. And Absalom, father of peace, is the type of the Antichrist. Okay? And Solomon's a type of both. So, he says, by setting their threshold by my threshold, and their post by my post, and the wall between me and them. This is all stuff he's saying Israel does. Israel and their kings. A holy name, they have defiled my holy name by their abominations that they have committed, wherefore I have consumed them in my anger. This is contemporary with Daniel. He's describing what they did in Daniel's 70th week. Remember, Ezekiel's not prophesying about the 70th week. He's prophesying about the Gog-Magog invasion. He barely mentions the 70th week, and then he goes right to the millennium. But now he's talking about what happened in Daniel's 70th week. Hindsight, okay? Again, you guys, your average prophecy teacher, your average prophecy buff and eschatology teacher, have you ever heard them teach on Ezekiel 43? It's Alan Kirshner Or, I mean, try to get them to talk about Ezekiel 38. Have any of the pre-tribbers, have any of the pre-wrathers talked about Ezekiel 43? It describes what happened in the last days. And how do I know this is in the last days? He says, now let them put away their whoredom and the carcasses of their king far from me, and I will dwell in their midst forever. Because it ends with Jesus sitting in the temple in the millennium. Okay? He says, thou son of man, show the house of Israel that they be ashamed of their iniquities, and let them measure the pattern. Now, how do I know these are not ancient Jews doing this? Because it's going to go on. If you read this, it's talking about all this stuff in the house, and it's talking about all the sin offerings they have to do throughout the millennium. And what is he saying that they're doing? That they be ashamed. Okay? Now, he's telling this is how they bear their shame throughout the millennium. And this is if they're repentant of what they did because they were deceived. If they're repentant of what they did, they're going to do this throughout the whole millennium without argument. Okay? They continue outside of the temple where Christ is to carry out the sacrifices. They're not allowed, these Levites are not allowed to go minister to Christ directly, except for the Sadducees, and David's the only one who's allowed to eat with them. But the rest of the world is going to go through and present themselves to the Lord year after year. And they're going to be carrying out the sin sacrifices throughout the entire millennium. People think, listen, you're dispensationalists who, quite frankly, are eschatological fools, think they're going to reinstitute the old covenant in the last days, and that is false. They base it on this. This is not a reinstitution of the Old Covenant. This is the Jews, the house of Israel, carrying out the Old Covenant sacrifices as an act of their shame. Because what Jesus is going to be doing, he's going to be teaching the whole world to understand these were a foretype of the death and resurrection of Christ. And the Jews are going to be sitting there carrying out the shadow over and over and over again as an act of their shame, okay? So it talks about all this stuff, and it says 7 days they shall purge the offering and purify it and consecrate themselves, and when these days are expired, it shall be that on the 8th day, so forth, the priest shall make the burnt offerings upon the altar, and your peace offerings I will accept before the Lord. Why do they make their burnt offerings on the eighth day? You ready for this, folks? What is the 8th day? It's eternity. The 7 days is when, it's the world, and then eternity, everything's burned up. So that's why you make your peace offerings and your sacrifices. We all go through the fire, and you're either pushed out to hell or you're pulled into God at the end, okay? So then it says, they brought me back to the way of the gate, the outward sanctuary that looked towards the east, and it was shut, okay? So Christ goes in there, and it's shut, okay? And it says, then said the Lord unto me, the gate shall be shut, it shall not be opened, and no man shall enter in by it, because of the Lord God of Israel has entered it, and therefore it shall be shut, okay? This is what the Antichrist is copying by sitting in the Holy Holies, and this is what the false prophet is copying. Okay, it is, and then it says, it is for the prince. The prince he shall sit and eat bread before the Lord, and he shall enter in by the way of the porch of that gate, and he shall go out by the same. So remember, in the second half of the millennium, it's the false prophet that is speaking for the Antichrist. He's given all the authority, okay? Now, the prince here is David. It's actually David, and it says this earlier in Ezekiel. I don't remember exactly where he says it, but the prince is David. It's the resurrected David who's going to be doing this. David, actually, his job is to, and this is all in this text, he tends the shepherd, he tends the flocks. He has this basically this huge tract of land where he tends the flocks that are used for these sacrifices, and he personally sits and eats with Jesus, okay? He's the prince, okay? Jesus is the Lord, and David is the prince. That's why the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand. Ready? The Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool, okay? So the Lord is saying to his Lord, who's going to be, he's going to be his right hand man now, okay? And he is in charge of the flocks that do all the sacrifices. And then he says, and thou shalt say to the rebellious, even the house of Israel, thus saith the Lord, O ye house of Israel, let it suffice you all of your abominations. Okay? And he says, and the Lord said to me, son of man, mark well and behold with thine eyes, and hear with all thy words what I say to thee concerning all the ordinances of the house of the Lord, and all the laws thereof, and mark well the entering in the house, which with every going forth of the sanctuary. Now, why does he say, mark well the entering in of the house? This is the obvious thing, you guys. Why does he say, mark well the entering in of the house? Because where did Jesus come in from? The east. He came in from that gate that is now walled off. Why does he say, mark well the entering of the house? Because the Antichrist is going to come in from the west and sit in the temple and claim that he's God. And that's how the Jews should know this is not Christ. Does the sun rise in the west? No, it rises in the east. The sun will rise with healing in his wings. This is not the Christ. but they don't know because their ears are dull of hearing, their eyes are blind, they don't know. Okay? That's why he says, mark well the entering of the house, because that's what you need to know. That's the thing the Antichrist is going to do wrong. He's going to do all this stuff that seems so much like what Christ does in the millennium, but then he's going to enter in the wrong gate. Now, what did Jesus say? What? He goes through the door of the sheepfold, right? Anyone who enters in by any other way is a thief and a robber. They're going to have all the evidence before them in the words of Christ, and in this passage, that's the Antichrist, that's not Christ, but they're going to fall for it anyways. That's the house of Israel. Okay? Joel Richardson, where he thinks the Jews won't be deceived by the Antichrist, he is so full of crap. You guys run from his theology. Oppose it wherever you can. Talk to anyone you can. He is a shill for the Jewish state, whether he knows it or not. Okay? He's a shill for the Jews that persecuted Christ, killed him, are going to lead the persecution of Christians, and are going to set up the image of the beast and set up the Antichrist to be worshipped. Okay? So he says, and thou shalt say to the rebellious, in that you have brought into my sanctuary strangers, uncircumcised in heart. Why? The Antichrist is a Danite. The Danites were kicked out of Israel. You'll find in the book of Chronicles, they are not mentioned. In the post-exilic writings, they are not mentioned. Why? Because they abandoned Israel completely by somewhere around the time of David. David still had some Danites in his army, but they sipped it off, and they basically mingled with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they left. They mingled with the Greeks. And by the time of the Maccabees, they are the Spartans. The Spartans are the Danites. Okay, there are other peoples too. They're like the Danes and I think there's Celtic tribes that are Danites, but they just moved. They sailed away. Okay, so they're gone. They rejected their heritage of Israel. And if you read in the Qumran scrolls, they have the prophecies of the patriarchs. Dan even tells them they're going to do this. This is way back when Dan himself is alive. He tells his sons that their descendants are going to do this, and then he tells them to follow Christ. Well, those are the strangers in the sanctuary because he has a Danite there. And the other one that's in there, which I think is Jared Kushner, that's my bet. He's not a Levite. He's not a high priest. He's not supposed to be there. So the Antichrist and the false prophet, they're not supposed to be in the Holy of Holies. Okay, so those are the strangers in a sanctuary, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, to be in my sanctuary and to pollute it, even in my house. So whoever the Antichrist is, he's uncircumcised. He's uncircumcised in flesh. Okay, he's an uncircumcised man. Okay. And then he says, to pollute it, even my house, when you offer my bread, the fat and the blood, which you have broken my covenant because of your abominations. Okay? And he says, and you have not kept charge of mine holy things, and you have set keepers in charge of my sanctuary for yourselves. Okay? You have not kept the charge of my holy things. In other words, the strict laws about how to keep the temple and who can go in and who can't. But you have set keepers of my charge, those are going to be the Antichrist and the false prophet, in my sanctuary. Now that's the image of the beast too, for yourselves. Okay? In other words, you're doing it your way in my holy of holies. He's not saying Antichrist and false prophet. He's saying the Jews are doing this with the Antichrist and the false prophet. Then he says, thus saith the Lord God, no stranger uncircumcised in heart nor uncircumcised in flesh shall enter into my sanctuary of any stranger that is among the children of Israel. Remember, you're supposed to be cut off if you weren't circumcised. So you've got a robot there. That robot ain't circumcised. And then you've got probably an uncircumcised Danite. That's probably who he is. He says, and the Levites that are gone far away from me when Israel went astray, which went astray from me after their idols, shall even bear their iniquity. So he's telling them the Levites love this. Okay? Remember, the Levites are trying to rebuild the Levitical priesthood right now. They're using genetics to find the Levites. And just so you know, if you have people whose last name is Kohen, Kohen is priestly class. They're Levites. And so you're going to have the Kohanim, and they're going to be coming, and they're going to basically carry this out. And he says, yet shall they be ministers in my sanctuary, having charge of the gates of the house and ministering to the house, and they shall slay burnt offerings and sacrifice for the people, and they shall stand before them to minister to them. Okay? Because they ministered unto them before idols, and caused the house of Israel to fall into iniquity. Therefore I have lifted up my hand against them, saith the Lord, and they shall bear their iniquity. So what are they doing? Now at the Feast of Tabernacles, which all the nations are meant to keep, they're going to be making sacrifices. And it's going to be a barbecue. It literally, the Feast of Tabernacles is going to be one big, huge event of camping and barbecuing. I mean, how awesome is our God that he's like, here's your religious ordinances you have to do, which is what we're all trying to do anyways, right? We're all just trying to work so hard so we can go camping and barbecue, right? That's the Feast of Tabernacles. We're gonna pack up in tents. We're gonna eat barbecued lamb and good meat, and then we're gonna be there for a week. It's a week-long camp out that the whole world does, and then in that week, during that week, we go in procession. We march before the Lord. We all look him in the face, and we do that every year. It's awesome. They shall not come near to me. This is the Levites. He says, they shall not come near to me to do the office of the priest unto me, nor come near to me to any of my holy things in the most holy place, but they shall bear their shame and their abominations which they committed. What is their abominations? Okay, God is not going to keep the image of the beast alive while they're there. Their abominations is going back under the law. The old covenant sacrifices. They're going back to this, okay? And I'm going to show you at the end of this, there's a group that is promoting Christians doing this right now. And it says, but I will make them keepers of the charge of the house for all the service thereof, and for all that shall be done therein. But the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, that kept the charge of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me, they shall come near to minister to me, and they shall stand before me to offer me the fat and the blood, saith the Lord. Okay, so the sons of Zadok apparently did the right thing. I don't know how this looks. It says they kept the charge of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me. I don't know what this looks like. I don't know what happens with the sons of Zadok. It says they shall enter into my sanctuary, and they shall come near to my table to minister me, and they shall keep my charge. Or they could leave the Jews that flee Jerusalem. I don't know what's going to happen. But it says it shall come to pass that when they enter in the gates of the inner court, that they shall be clothed with linen garments, and no wool shall come upon them, whilst they minister the gates of the inner court and within. And they shall have linen bonnets on their head, and they shall have linen breeches on their loins. They shall not gird themselves with anything that causes sweat. And when they go forth from the utter court, even to the utter court of the people, they shall put off their garments wherein they ministered, and lay them in holy chambers, and they shall put on other garments, and they shall not sanctify the people with their garments. So these Sadducees, when they go out of the temple, they're wearing normal clothes. They only wear them in the temple. They only wear their linen, which the fine linen is the righteousness of the saints, the type of our resurrected bodies. But they basically, when they go out, they look like regular people. When they go in, they look like holy priests. Neither shall they shave their heads nor suffer their locks to grow long. They shall only pull their heads. They shall neither shall any priest drink wine when they enter into the inner court. Neither shall they take for their wives. Okay, so this is how you know these are living people in the millennium, not resurrected saints. Neither shall they take for their wives a widow, nor her that is put away, so a divorced woman. They will not marry a widow or a divorced woman, but they shall take maidens of the seed of the house of Israel, or a widow that had a priest before. So he's dictating who they can marry. They can marry a widow of a priest, or virgins of the seed of the house of Israel, but they cannot take a widow or someone, a common widow, or somebody that is put away. In other words, a divorced woman. Okay? And they shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the profane. So see, you're going to have the other Levites bear the shame of carrying out the sacrifices, and these Sadducees, these sons of Zadok, are going to be teaching them the difference between the holy and the profane. Profane, remember, doesn't mean evil, it means common. Okay, that's what it means. The holy and the common. Okay, and cause them to discern between the clean and the unclean. And in the controversy they shall stand in judgment, and they shall judge it according to my judgments, and they shall keep my laws and my statutes in mine assemblies, and they shall hallow my Sabbaths. Now this is so important. That was meant to be the job of the Levitical priests. But in the Hasmonean Dynasty, she gives that power. This is the power to divide and loose. This discerning between the clean and unclean, the holy and profane, that is the power to bind and loose, okay? The Hasmonean Dynasty, this is Queen Alexandra, who's the last Hasmonean or Maccabean queen. She gives that power to the Pharisees, which aren't even Levitical priests. They're just teachers. They're basically a club of teachers that formed in Babylon. Okay, she gives it to them instead of the priestly class. Okay, it was meant to go to the priestly class. That's why you have so many priests, but you only have like one high priest ministering the altar. Well, what are all the other priests doing? Well, they're meant to be pastors. They're meant to be pastors and teachers. But they ruined it for them because they weren't giving their tithes and stuff like that. And then it says, and they shall come at no dead person to defile themselves, but for a father or a mother or a son or a daughter or a brother for a sister, that hath no husband, they may defile themselves. So how do we know these are not resurrected saints? Because their families are dying. Okay, father, mother, son, daughter, they're getting married, they're having kids, and they're still dying. He says, and after he is cleansed, he shall reckon unto him 7 days. And in the day that he goeth forth into the sanctuary, into the inner court to minister in the sanctuary, he shall offer a sin offering, saith God. Now check this out. He spends 7 days, and then he goes into the inner sanctuary. And when he goes in the inner sanctuary, he puts on his holy garments. Why is this so important? This is so important because what are you going to do at the end of the millennium? After the 7,000 years, you're going to go into the New Jerusalem if you're worthy. Because remember, nobody that's defiled is going to go into the New Jerusalem, and the whole outside is going to be burnt. But when you go into the New Jerusalem, you're going to receive your resurrected body. Okay, we are already going to have it in the resurrection, but those in the millennium who are saved get it when they go in the New Jerusalem at the end. Okay, because the New Jerusalem is Noah's Ark. And this is what I believe about Ezekiel's temple, you guys. This is really cool when you get into this. So you see Ezekiel's temple. Remember, Ezekiel's temple is going to be on the New Jerusalem, which is it's not going to be a pointy mountain anymore. It's going to be a huge plateau, okay? And this is so important. You need to understand the practicality of why. There's not going to be a mountain like that. Remember, the mountain's split in two, and then it's somehow going to be level, and there's going to be a river flowing through it. Well, if you look at this cross shape right here is where we're going to be going to presenting ourselves to the Lord, okay? And then this right here is where they go to, it is actually, I think David uses this gate. There's like a little sub gate to the gate that's shut, and David goes in there to minister to the Lord. And David goes in there to eat, and the Sadducees basically serve him dinner. Okay, so they're literally his household servants. This is literally the house of Jesus. He's served food here. David goes and eats with him. And we once a year go and present ourselves to him. He is the high king. He's the king of kings. This is so awesome, you guys. I believe, this is my crazy theory, that it's designed this way so that the New Jerusalem can set down on it flat. And so when we go in for that final one, we go into the New Jerusalem. And then the whole world is burned. The whole universe is burned. That's what I believe is going to happen. We'll see if I'm right, but we're going to continue with the text. It says, and it shall be unto them for an inheritance. Remember, these are the Zadoks. I am their inheritance, and you shall give them no possession in Israel. I am their possession. They shall eat the meat offering, the sin offering, the trespass offering, and every dedicated thing to the Israel shall be theirs. That's the Sadducee Levites. And the first of all, the first fruits of all things, and the oblation of all, and every sort of oblation shall be the priest. You shall also give unto the priest the first of your dough, that he may cause a blessing in the rest of thine house. The priest shall not eat anything that is dead of itself, or torn, whether it be fowl or beast. So, and the rest is talking about the division of the land. But remember, Ezekiel 43 and 44 explain what the Levitical priests are going to be doing during the millennium. And you need to get this stuff down because it's hindsight, because it talks, one is it proves that they're living people who are marrying, living, and dying. Okay, that's the one side that you need to get down. The other side you need to get down is all the stuff that God accuses them of doing before that, which means they were living people who enter in the millennium who did all that. That's how you know with absolute certainty that the Jews are the ones who led everybody into the worship of the Old Covenant first, and then the worship of the beast, with the exception of the Sadducees. Okay, and my guess is the Sadducees, remember, because they say when you see the abomination of desolation standing in a place where it shall not, well, wait a minute, your average Jew is not going to see that, because your average Jew doesn't come into the temple. The Sadducees, the Levitical priests, will come into the temple. And it's going to be them that tell the people, we need to run, we need to get the heck out of here. Okay? That's what I think is going to happen. So, that is the religious aspect. So the last one I covered, the political aspect. This is the religious aspect. The next one I'm going to cover, and this is going to be largely speculative, but it's going to be basically the image of the beast and the mark of the beast and what I believe it is. So I hope you guys are blessed by this. Again, you guys, I know I'm one guy with 70 followers. I'm not looking to have a huge audience. I'm not looking to be famous, but I am looking for this information to get out. So anything you guys can do to spread this, or my book, or anything, like, you guys, this is stuff people need to know, because the amount of people, listen, I'm living in a place where it's like 13,000 people, and there are 50 churches up here. And I just got out of a conversation with a pastor about this yesterday. We both saw it crystal clear. I said, listen, there's a hunger and an appetite for eschatology right now. And here's your problem. Most of the churches that teach on eschatology are going to be one of two things. Amillennial, which they're teaching, don't worry, this is not the end times, we're not anywhere close to it, it's all symbolic. Or Pre-Trib, which is saying, don't worry, we're going to be raptured before this happens, this is not the book of Revelations, don't worry about it, okay? Neither one of them are even entertaining the possibility that we could be in the seals right now. And I believe we are. I believe we're in the seals, it's progressive, and it's going to keep getting worse, okay? Now think about this. That's all you have. And then the only other people who are really teaching about eschatology with any seriousness are Seventh-day Adventists, which are leading you back into the law. It's the only people that are teaching on eschatology. That's why what I'm saying, I believe, is for this time is very important. And, you know, again, I have no desire to be famous. God's blessed me with more money than I need, honestly. I want to be useful. I'd like to get married and have kids. That's the only kind of selfish thing I want for myself. Other than that, I just want to be useful and productive for the Lord. But this information, it seems like God's given to me pretty uniquely, and it's in His Word. I'm validating it. It's not me. It's not, my ability or anything. It's just what God's been revealing to me more and more over the years, and I think it's getting clearer and clearer. So, again, it's us against the world, you guys. If you're listening to this and you're spreading it, we are a remnant who are teaching eschatological truth, and I need you guys' help. So please spread it around. Buy a copy of the book for somebody. Point somebody to the channel, get them to watch it, get them to watch this. I'm not an anti-Zionist conspiracy theorist. I'm somebody who reads the Bible, and what does it say? It says the Jews are going to lead the people to worship the Antichrist. Joel Richardson, it's like, I don't hate the dude. I just think he's a moron that wanted to sell his Islamic Antichrist theory. He's gotten so stubborn about this bad theory that he's getting worse and worse and worse, and he's actually going over to what the Jews would want. I think Chris White is somebody that people need to reach out to and get him to listen to this stuff, because I think we would be in total agreement on where the Jews stand, but we're in total disagreement on the eschatological timeline, and he needs to listen. Alan Kirshner needs to listen. John Haller needs to listen. These guys, listen, I consider them on my team, but wrong about some very important things. They need to listen, and I've gotten some responses from Chris White, some responses from John Haller, got kind of blown off by Alan Kirshner. I'm trying to get people who are closer to what I'm viewing to listen to what I'm saying, because it's important. They're missing major details. Okay, so I hope you guys are blessed by this. Hope you can help me out. Batman out. Peace.
Peace, I'm out. I'm Batman.